summer break. I hope everybody is rested and ready for another productive year. I'd like to call to order the 932nd meeting of the Board of Directors of Alexandria Sanitation Authority, now known as AlexRenew. And as we do at all meetings, let's begin by introducing the staff members who are here today. Mr. Rock, you don't make any introductions.
Yeah, we'll start with Mr. Rock from DEQ.
Hello. Familiar face.
Mr. Bovary with Raptelis. Ms. Ling with Raptelis. And we also have Mr. Vincent representing us tonight as well. He is with Schnabel Engineering.
Oh.
And
Don't forget IT support.
Antoine, Cyber will be providing IT support.
I think you know Mr. President.
Good. Good. Okay, let's take a look at the agenda. And is there a motion to approve the agenda as it appears? Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Ms. Huff, are there any members of the public?
No members of the public.
Jane is keeping them away. Okay, let's jump right into the consent agenda. And all we have on that are the minutes from our meeting on the 15th. If there's a motion to approve the minutes as they appear, entertain that. Is there a second?
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving right along. A couple of administrative items, the board calendar on tab 2. Carl, are there any things that you'd like to point out in the calendar other than the open house this week?
Yeah, we have open house on Saturday and then Pendleton Street on October 18th, the ribbon cutting event. So we're getting organized for the 18th and we should be all set for Saturday. The safety fence is all up at the plant, ready for tours.
Okay. Well attended, great.
Multiple people have texted me asking if I can put them up for tours. The demand exceeds the supply of tour slides.
So that's true. But we just opened up 4 additional spots per tour. So Bethany's been reaching out to people to sign up. So there'll likely be some spots available.
People are very excited.
It's going to be a great
Yeah.
thing. Sharam, it is great to see you.
And here's, sorry.
And I understand this may be your last meeting.
Yes, it is.
I'd like to sort of interrupt the proceedings so far and recognize Sharam's very significant contribution. Many of you don't know this, that Sharam has been Fairfax's representative to this board since December of 2002.
It's been a while.
Wow.
Is that amazing? And I've got,
It's not quite
I've got to say,
It's not quite 932 meetings, but it's close.
it's close.
Yeah. Woo.
It's probably 300 of them anyway. And I've got to say, Sharam, throughout that very long period, think about all the change this organization's gone through. Throughout it all, you know, you've been just the most valuable partner we could have. You know, you're just very thoughtful, very, very even-tempered, and very, very, very considerate in your contributions. And I've always valued it. I know all the other board members have as well. We're going to miss you a lot. I'm going to miss you a lot.
Thank you.
I wish you well in retirement.
Thank you.
As a retiree, I can tell you it's wonderful.
That's what I'm looking for.
We have a card here for you, and I know we have a cake at some point at the end of the meeting, so we'll rush the meeting along as quick as we can. And I hope everybody can stay around and have a piece of cake and really say some nice words to Sharam, because you're leaving a very big presence that I'm sure your successor will fill. But you're just wonderful, thoughtful, and very gracious involvement is going to be missed.
Well, thank you. The feeling is mutual. I've enjoyed a very good relationship, collaborative, especially with Justin, our board. It's been great. Thank you.
This is exactly the way it should work. Yeah, good. Well, enjoy your
We
last week.
appreciate the services we receive, by the way.
Well, we appreciate the revenue. So thank you. Okay, jumping right back to board calendar. Anything else on the calendar? Finance and Audit Committee, we've got something coming up. Mr. Jenks?
We will be getting, the audit is, I assume, underway and on schedule, I assume. And so therefore, audit committee, we next meet on November 12th and we'll see what the details and what the auditor has wrought. Hopefully a nice, clean opinion.
Mr. Hill and Mr. Jenks, the auditor will be reaching out to schedule time to talk to both of you, like they do every year as part of the audit. So look for an email from Mr. Akankube and Brad Tomlinson, our auditor. Get something set up. And then we'll follow up with a separate note to set up a prep meeting with the Finance and Audit Committee to prepare for the 12th.
Governance.
We have a governance committee preparatory meeting next Monday, the 22nd, and Mr. Carl, that's at 4:00. Is that correct? And then we have our governance committee meeting on October 7th at 5:30 here.
Great, good. Yours getting off to a good start. Board retreat coming up in February of 26. That's not the Super Bowl weekend.
No. We avoided Valentine's Day and Super Bowl.
Any comments on that? Any? Still far a ways off.
We've got a structure really briefly because we have a long meeting tonight. We have a half day planned at Building Momentum to do governance games. We'll do a little bit of a strengths finding exercise and then we'll do a team building event. You're all going to compete against the staff by building a catapult. Saturday, we're going to do a full tour of AlexRenew. We're calling it AlexRenew Preview. While we're out doing the tour, we'll stop for lunch, come back here and finish out a tour at the pump station. There'll be a brief presentation in the morning.
Yeah, so I'll let the board know there will be catapult building training in advance of the retreat.
Because we're gonna win.
We're
We're not messing around.
We're not missing out.
That's right. High bar.
It's a high bar. Okay. Anything else on the retreat? Good. Okay. Let's move right into the presentation by Mr. Rock on the environmental quality, your new role. So anxious to hear from you.
Thank you.
Maybe just a quick introduction. We talked about this and Mr. Rock, for your information, our governance committee put together some annual ongoing education. Part of that is attending a conference or bringing in speakers like yourself to give an update on the status of the environment in Virginia. So that's the context of why you're here and following up on our governance commitment. We've got these speakers on there.
Great. I think clickers will work. Well, it's great to be back home. Caitlin has given me permission to indulge in a little bit of personal biography. I know a lot of you around the table. I started working as a lawyer for AlexRenew, I think in 2006. So Shahram has me beat, and it's wonderful to see you tonight. Became the general counsel for the authority sometime in the mid-teens. Spent probably 15 or 20 years in that role. And then departed with my failed retirement in July of 22, so a little over 2.5 years ago. And left McGuire Woods, where I was at the law firm, and enrolled in graduate school. Went up, drove up to New Haven with my wife and spent 2 years at the Yale School of the Environment after having gotten great recommendations from Caitlin, who was a graduate as well. And I got a degree in environmental management. And as part of that degree in environmental management, the school says that you have to do an internship. And so I had searched between my first and second years, looking for an internship. Talked to some prominent environmental NGOs who looked at me and said, "You're too old." Clearly, they hadn't seen the Robert De Niro movie and could have seen the possibilities there. But nevertheless, I said, "Well, I'm going to submit my application anyway." And it required a reference, and thought about who I might get. And coincidentally, someone who I knew for about 30 years. Mike Rollband was the director of the Department of Environmental Quality, which I'm going to talk to you about. And so I called Mike and said, "Hey, would you be a reference for this summer internship?" And he said, "Sure, I'll be happy to, but I'd rather hire you to write the regulations to mitigate utility scale solar development on forests and farms." And I said, "Well, that sounds like a fun job for the summer." So I signed up to do that. And it actually continued through the school year. And Mike had an opening for one of his two deputies. The department has an appointed director and then two deputies who are also appointed by the governor. And Mike invited me to apply for that job, and was very fortunate that I was able to get that appointment. And so I started full-time at the Department of Environmental Quality as the Chief Policy Advisor right after graduation in, what was that, 24, May of 24. So I've been there working on all sorts of different initiatives that the director has assigned me to, which have been great fun. And one of my roles is obviously in doing outreach around the state, and Justin and Caitlin and Amanda generously invited me to come meet with you. I've got a bunch of slides I'll go through and talk about some of the interactions between DEQ and AlexRenew. But I'd love this to be mostly a conversation where I can also hear from you and get questions and concerns and comments on what we're doing kind of at the state level as an environmental agency. So agenda for the slides, funding, and water quality improvement. And I kind of structured that as I was thinking about this relationship and the way that DEQ interacts with authorities and specifically with AlexRenew. And the first part is the fun part, the funding part, which we've actually been very active with the authority in recent times. The department administers 4 different funds, both grants and loans. The Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, which AlexRenew really isn't particularly involved in because that's much more for municipalities working on their stormwater programs. Water Quality Improvement Fund, which is a grant program, and then a one-time fund from the American Rescue Plan for wastewater funds. And as you can see, you guys are one of our favorite customers. Over the last few years, $336 million have come from DEQ to AlexRenew. I guess we still have a little bit of a loan balance for you all to get about $4 million, but most of it has made its way over here. And you all probably know what these projects are better than I do. I could look at my notes and talk more detail about them. Obviously, a lot of the funding, most of the funding has gone to the river project. That has the biggest need. This is just another chart that says the same thing. So what I wanted to do is put those numbers, that 336 million, in the context of overall funding that we provide. And as you can see, that's a pretty big chunk of the annual amount of money that DEQ is able to disperse. The Water Quality Improvement Fund, which is, as I said, a grant program, annually does a needs assessment where we reach out through VAMWA and other organizations and we ask for the projected needs of the different wastewater entities, municipalities, and authorities. And we tally up those projected needs to try to come up with a forecast for the amount of money that's needed from this fund. In the current fiscal year 25, we had 22 projects that were identified by the utilities from 14 different localities that responded. The total need is about $3.5 billion from state funds as well as locality matching contributions, et cetera. For this next fiscal year through to 2030, approximately 34% of this total, 1.17, could be needed from the Water Quality Improvement Fund. But this bottom line is the one that is somewhat concerning, which is that if you look at the allocated needs, the obligations that we've already committed to, and the current fund balance, we have an estimated shortfall of around 670 million. So we will be identifying that to the General Assembly, to the money committees later this year. And I'm hopeful that they will try to find some money to fill that gap. As you probably know, Virginia has had a surplus over the last few years, but the forecasts coming into this next budget cycle are not nearly as optimistic. So that's going to be something that we're all going to be paying attention to and having some concerns about. Wanted to brag a little bit about what our Office of Clean Water Finance and Assistance has accomplished, particularly in the last year. It has not historically been our finest office, I'll admit, particularly in terms of the efficiency of disbursements. And one time I was in Richmond with Karen Palanch, and we were down there for some other meetings, and she said that she needed to get some disbursements from the WQIF. And I said, sure, whatever, I'll tag along. And she first stopped off at a local bakery and got a box of donuts. And we marched up to a trailer that was sitting in a parking lot near the DEQ office. I guess it was a temporary office where Walter, I don't know, you may remember Walter. He apparently was the guy who issued the disbursements. And the way that you got a disbursement is that you showed up his office with a box of donuts, and if you were lucky, you might be able to get the check. And you couldn't make this stuff up. But that was kind of how our disbursements, our DEQ's disbursements operated for many years. And when Director Rollband came in and sort of saw the state of things and the fact that there were grant agreements that had been sitting around for years unsigned, he was able to really reform that office. Megan Mayfield, who was in our permitting division, came over and did an absolutely terrific job. And now I can proudly point to the fact that it takes us on average 12 days for disbursements from our funds, which is just a total turnaround. Lots of good news on this slide. And I think that it's looking very positive in terms of our responsiveness to our customers, and we're going to try to keep that up. So the next sort of relationship that we have with AlexRenew is in our role as the primary environmental regulator. And we engage with you all, particularly with your staff, on a regular basis. As you I'm sure know, you monitoring on a basis, and have a thing cycle that I'll describe in just a minute. But as long as I'm bragging about the accomplishments of the department, I wanted to really highlight what I think is the signature achievement of Director Rollband. When he came into DEQ, he came from the perspective of a consultant who'd been doing a lot of wetlands permitting work over the years and was keenly aware of some of the problems in terms of getting permits through the process, through the regulatory agency. And he came up with this initiative that he identified as PEEP, the acronym PEEP, which is now the Virginia Permit Transparency Program. And he was able to take all of the different permitting processes that the agency does and get them into a consolidated online platform where every single permit is tracked. There are anticipated durations for review of every stage of the application. This includes all of the agencies that are also have to give commenting reviews on our applications. And all of this is put onto a platform. You all could look at it. Any member of the public can see the status of every single application. And it has these bars that show whether we're behind schedule or we're ahead of schedule, including, very importantly, whether the applicant has met the response times that they need to keep things moving along. And it's been transformative. It's been transformative, I think, for applicants. It's really made changes within the department. And I think we've gotten a lot of notoriety. Environmental Policy Center says, if you can track a pizza, why can't you track a permit? And we can do that. You can do that. Any permit that DEQ handles. And the result of this transparency in particular and accountability is that when the director came into office in 2022, the average time it took to get any of our permits in DEQ was 339 days. And as of August 28th this year, it's 119 days, basically cutting it by 2/3. And that's good for the environment. It's good for the applicants. We always make the point that the same reductions that we've achieved in the processing time to issue permits have tracked in our enforcement. It used to take 670 days for a typical enforcement action. We got that down to 200 days. So sort of hand in glove comes along with faster, more efficient processing of permits, but at the same time, enforcement, if you don't follow those permits, if you don't comply, is going to be fast and effective as well. I think this is a very successful way of, frankly, encouraging environmental compliance. If you know that you're going to get a permit faster, easier, and potentially cheaper, you're not going to be complaining as much about these regulations, and it tends to help protect the laws that we have in place to protect environmental resources. And I think it's been very successful, and we're hoping it'll continue going forward. Specifically for AlexRenew, there is a Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit for your discharges out here to, I guess it's Hufsrun. No, it's not Hufsrun, it's Cameron Green. Yeah. And those permits have a 5-year duration. Your last one was issued in July of 21. It expires June 30th of next year. You all have already submitted for your permit. And a very excellent collaborative process, I understand, with the Northern Region office as that goes forward. I will admit that because it technically doesn't start the application until January, you can't go on PEEP and find where the status is. You have to wait till it officially begins in January. But then every day you can find out exactly where it is and who's reviewing the application. My understanding is that there are a few requested changes in the reissuance of the application. All of those seem to be moving forward with not a lot of controversy, as I understand. We'll see how that goes. But that's one of the primary ways that we interact with AlexRenew. So we also, from a regulatory perspective, have what we call a triennial review, which is looking at water quality throughout the state. I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but there are a few of our water quality standards that are likely to change as we complete that review. My understanding, they're identified on this slide. is that other than PFAS, which we'll talk about, I don't expect that there'll be any changes that would have a direct impact on your permit. We do a lot of water quality monitoring and assessment, over 1,500 stations for monitoring. We do a lot of monitoring for harmful algal blooms around the state, particularly in the lakes and reservoirs. And that information feeds into a lot of the regulatory decisions that we end up making. Out of order. Let's see. We talk about PFAS because that's so fun. You all, I know, are quite familiar with some of these issues, and you've got some real experts on your staff and others are great resources throughout the state on trying to deal with this issue. And one of the areas where this is coming up is what to do with biosolids. So one of the things that we regulate in addition to discharges of water into the receiving water bodies are land application of biosolids. And we've had a number of updates in this past year to our regulation on land application. The primary one, let's make sure, slide, is some regulatory action that has to do with what happens when it rains too hard and you can't get all of the biosolids applied to the field. There were some issues that came up a couple of years ago where there was one of these really wet seasons and Synagro and others were not able to apply the biosolids that they'd actually transported to the farms. They were exceeding their storage capacities. And so we've been working with the industry to try to come up with some leeway in those sorts of unusual events to allow for what we call emergency action plans. We've had a couple of changes to the regulations which specifically allow biosolids research to be exempt from permitting. This apparently was an issue because Virginia Tech and others that were doing needed research on biosolids application would have to go through our permit process, which even though it's fast, it's not that fast, particularly when you have public hearings and lots of review. So we have moved forward with a very limited exemption for these research projects to go forward without having to get a separate land application. This is where I was a little off track. So one of the most significant issues that we're facing now is concerns about PFAS being in biosolids that get applied to the farms and then reaching their way into waters, groundwater, surface water, and then being a risk for human consumption in particular. There was a really unfortunate incident you probably heard about, happened up in Maine, where there were cross-contaminated biosolids that were applied to some, I think there was some pasture, and it got into the cow's milk, and was a real issue. And that was just one anecdote. What we're finding is that PFAS is ubiquitous. Virginia Tech did some sampling in remote rural wells in southwestern Virginia where there were no apparent sources for PFAS. And even in those rural wells, they were finding concentrations approaching the maximum contaminant level that EPA is moving toward or was moving toward. So it is a very legitimate concern and one that we're paying attention to at DEQ. We've been criticized, honestly. I saw an article today in the Richmond Times-Dispatch about the Fort Belvoir stormwater permit, that DEQ has not been more aggressive about regulating PFAS. And the approach that we have been taking is really to be fairly deferential to the legislature in Virginia. Every year for the past 3 or 4 years, the General Assembly has debated a number of different bills about PFAS and its potential regulation. And we have tried to take their lead. And if they have chosen not to act to specifically regulate PFAS, they wanted to be consistent with that lead. That's not to say that we aren't very concerned about the issue, and we are moving forward with a lot of scientific work and monitoring work to lay the groundwork to get to the point where we begin regulating PFAS, particularly in biosolids. So we have an expert committee that advises us. We've been doing sampling throughout the state, and you can see in this graphic that we have found exceedances of that 3 parts per trillion, I think, concentration that the EPA, Office of Research and Development, identified as a concern threshold. And there are a number of drinking water systems in the state. The magenta circles are groundwater systems that rely on wells, and the blue squares are surface water drinking water systems, including the one close by, which is the Fairfax water withdrawal on the Occoquan Reservoir, where some exceedances of this. This is not technically a maximum contaminant level. It's threshold the EPA has identified. So we've been working with the water utilities in those various regions and trying to identify where sources are. That's been our real focus, is not to require that either wastewater plants or the water treatment plants to remove the PFAS, but to see if we can go upstream to the source and reduce the source of the PFAS that's coming into the waters. So these are a couple of the watersheds that we're focused on and that we've been collecting data from all of the different potential sources of PFAS. Of course, the closest one is that Occoquan watershed that serves Fairfax water. And there is another watershed in the Chickahominy outside of Richmond that is affected primarily by discharges from a national airfield using firefighting foams that are also a significant source. And then down in South Central Virginia, leading to the big reservoir there. There was a bill passed last year that specifically relates to the Occoquan Reservoir and gave us direction and authority to begin sampling the different potential sources, working with Fairfax Water, and moving toward the probable issuance of pretreatment requirements and amending any discharge permits within that watershed where we think it could be a source of PFAS. So that we're seeing in some ways as a model for how this issue may be dealt with throughout the state, and are very much focused on that.
John, before we move off that very important slide, could you go into a little more detail? What are the sources? What industrial plants target? Can you
So
broad definitions of the type of industrial processes that are?
what we have done is, and this is a little bit deeper than I've been involved with from the science side, but our staff, and we have some PhD scientists who are focusing on PFAS, have looked at the standard industrial classification codes and correlated where they've identified the possible handling. This is maybe with a rare exception, these are not facilities that create or manufacture PFAS, but they're handling substances that have PFAS in them, and through exposure to either processed water or storm water that's somehow getting into the environment. And I probably could guess at some of the different types of industries, but so. Questions on it? So this is just an update on sort of our process, implement bill, and working with Fairfax Water on this issue. I do know, particularly in the Occoquan, that one of the major identified sources, not surprisingly, is Dulles Airport. And because they had areas where they had some plane fires and they had to use foams, they got into its way into the Occoquan reservoir. Thank you. All right, so that was a little bit touched on PFAS, and this topic of water quality improvement, I really see as really the most important partnership or area you engages with AlexRenew specifically and authorities in general. You know, we have this habit of kind of taking credit for all of these water quality improvements, and we've removed this much nitrogen from the Chesapeake Bay and this, that, and the other thing. And the truth is that DEQ hasn't done any of it. We've just worked with all of you, the regulated utilities, to actually get those improvements in water quality. So the credit needs to stay back with folks who are doing that work. You and other utilities do. A lot of our focus, of course, particularly here, but in general, is on the Chesapeake Bay and trying to improve the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. You all probably know that going back decades, there have been agreements among the different states within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which also go hand in glove with the EPA's regulation through the total maximum daily load Chesapeake Bay, as to allocating the reductions, particularly of nutrients flowing into the bay. And there was an excellent report that was done by the Chesapeake Bay Scientific Technical Advisory Committee, I guess a year ago or so, called the CSER, the acronym is CSER report, which came up with some really important conclusions, generally saying that we've been doing a good job in terms of making progress on our targets for Chesapeake Bay water quality, but also pointing out that we aren't there and we haven't really accomplished what our specific goals were by the dates that were identified. Part of that, they suggest, is that we have perhaps too much focus on water quality in the main stem deep water of the Chesapeake Bay. And we probably should look a little bit more broadly in terms of water quality in the estuaries, where people are really interacting with the water. And there's some really good recommendations. The one that I find very compelling is to really put a focus on the cost efficiency of the efforts that we have required for cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those indicators, but our conclusion is that we've been spending a tremendous amount of money, we, the state, citizens of Virginia, other states, and on a per pound basis, we're getting ripped off. We're paying way too much money collectively for the reductions in these nutrients, and there are better ways, more cost-effective ways, potentially, to achieve the reductions that we need. I'll get into that. This is a graph that focuses on nitrogen loads, which has been the most persistent and recalcitrant problem that we've been facing for bay water quality. And you can see the green line is the planning target for the amount of pounds of nitrogen that are flowing into the bay from Virginia. And when you get over here to the very right side, you see the watershed implementation plan, which is below where we are or where we were in 2024, and I'm sure where we are in 2025. So we are still falling somewhat short in terms of getting that nitrogen out. Wastewater treatment plants are doing a phenomenal job. There's been a lot of funding, obviously, that's flowed to that, but I think you all are down to what, 3 parts per?
3 milligrams per liter.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And that's where most of the improvement over the last 2 decades has occurred from the point source industrial and municipal wastewater treatment plants. Agriculture is making some strides, but you can see that there's still a big gap. That's been a real focus. The message that I know you probably don't want to hear is that even though non-point sources are the most difficult problem to solve, the most efficient way to get the nitrogen out of our waters is to continue to work with wastewater treatment plants. We had a program 2 years ago where we had essentially an auction where we announced to all of the wastewater treatment plants in the Chesapeake Bay, we had a $10,000 set aside from the $10 million set aside from the WQIF to pay for additional reductions in the nitrogen coming out of point sources. And we got some great responses. A number of different treatment plants were successful bidders, so to speak, on that. And we got a price of about $8 a pound for the removal of nitrogen. And those are marginal costs, so maybe not a completely indicative price. But we compare that to non-point source projects where we are paying, in some cases, municipalities $100,000 a pound for the removal of nitrogen. And so you can see when you use these wonderful plants like you all have created, there's some real efficiencies that can be achieved. Now, obviously, there's a point of diminishing returns. We know that, but it just emphasizes the significance that wastewater treatment plants have in achieving these bay goals. So with that, I will stop and really eager to hear your thoughts about DEQ. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Questions?
John, you mentioned in the last slide auctions or either credits for nitrogen or what role would DEQ play in establishing a true auction process for that, statewide or maybe broader?
Yeah. So one of the initiatives that landed on my desk last year was a General Assembly appropriation of $20 million to pay for what they call a pay for outcomes non-point source pollution reduction program. And what we did is we put out a request for applications and we essentially advertised for anyone. It could be a municipality, a nonprofit, a for-profit corporation to submit grant applications to reduce nitrogen flowing into the Chesapeake Bay. And we got, I can't remember how many, but we had, of the $20 million appropriation, we had requests for 120 million of that. So we had a very robust response, very competitive applications from all sorts of different sectors. And we were able to achieve, I mean, they haven't done it yet, but the grants indicate that we will achieve, I think, an average of about $35 a pound for the removal of nitrogen from non-point sources, which not quite the $8 that you all can do or the treatment plants can do, but it's really looking very promising. We had some really fascinating applications, a couple of which were winners. One is apparently a lot of nitrogen comes from chicken houses, and there are a lot of chicken houses in Virginia. And it comes from gaseous ammonia coming up from the chickens in their urine, in that cloud of ammonia dispersing across the landscape and then precipitating down and getting into the water. And so this one applicant has a special machine that intercepts all of that gaseous ammonia within these chicken houses and collects it. And then we go out and we read the measure on the tank and we say, yep, you've got X pounds of nitrogen that you've removed. So that was one interesting one. The other one that people kind of laugh at a little bit, but we are funding Lixil. Lixil, you thought, who is Lixil? They own American Standard, and they are the largest manufacturer of toilets in the world. And they have a new product, which is a urine diverting flush toilet that they are trying to get out there on the market. And so they are going to deploy these urine diverting flush toilets in households, particularly in the Tidewater area of Virginia, take that urine stream, so to speak, put it through a biofilter and remove the nitrogen there. So we got some really creative and terrific things. Hampton Road Sanitation District, we're funding disconnections of septic fields, which are a source of nitrogen. But that's just one example of where if we have the monetary resources, we can actually go out and get these reductions. Ultimately, it might make sense to divert some of the regulatory requirements, particularly on non-point source pollution, and allow folks who are discharging that non-point source pollution to maybe pay into a fund that offsets their discharges. We do have a mechanism that's already in place now, where if you have a construction general permit and you need to get compliance with your discharges of nitrogen and phosphorus, you can, to a limited degree, pay into that fund and buy credits and not have to do the on-site reductions to those pollutants. So we see that as an area that hopefully will grow going forward. And again, if collectively as a society, we can get much greater environmental benefits for the same or less money than we're spending overall, we think that's a win.
Do you think we'll ever get to the day where you'd have both point and non-point sources in the same ecosystem, auction ecosystem? Because, I think a plant like this can do it for $8 a pound.
I think that would be a fantastic idea. For various political reasons, our funding sources tend to be separated.
Point and non-point.
And non-point and point. But I think, frankly, they should all be looked at on sort of an even playing field in terms of cost effectiveness. That's just my personal opinion. I don't speak for the administration on that.
Thank you.
There are some things you have to be careful of though, like localized impacts. Like if you're, we're thinking about the Chesapeake Bay as a whole right now. And so if you're thinking about the Bay, it doesn't really matter if the reduction happens over here or over here. But if you are a community that lives next to the farm that's discharging the chicken pee or whatever, you might care if they're actually reducing pollution versus over here.
That's true.
So
True.
it's tricky. And verification but that's the verification of point source reductions is much easier than verifying non-point
Chicken.
source. So right, it's like it can be tricky. So it's complicated. But yeah.
Agree with both of those points. Perfect. Questions or concerns? Any stories to tell me from compliance with CSO requirements?
I don't have comment on CSO in Virginia. I just looked at your permit when we were saying you guys reduced it. How did you come up with those targets? Is it based on public comment or something?
So the permit processing timeframes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are actually measured dates from the time that an applicant actually submits their application to the day that the permit is issued.
So I understand that. I say, how did you guys come up with those targets? Because it was 339 and then you reduced it under 25.
Oh, the
How
target,
did we come
yeah,
up with those
yeah,
targets?
thank you. Appreciate your patience. So what we did is that we gathered the program staff for all of our different permits, and we sat them down and asked them to do a process flow chart of every single step that's involved in reviewing and approving a permit, and then assigning what they think would be the minimum duration that each of those steps would take. And those are all put out on this platform, shows you exactly what those process steps are and the duration. And the director, who is very ambitious, his view is, well, if we're meeting those, then they must be too easy. We ought to do, stretch goals a little bit more than what we've already come up with. But that's how we came up with those process timelines. For me?
That's your dog?
No. No, but our communications team said everybody likes dogs and puppies. Pick that up.
They were pretty dogs.
Mr. Rock, I think getting back to the CSO live, we're going through the process now of the pumps are here. So we can breathe a sigh of relief that the pumps made it without being decapitated in New Jersey this time. So we're in a second round of pumps. We're starting also to write our operations manuals and how we're going to operate the system. And as you know, the wet weather pump station operates for, on average, like 11 hours a year. So getting that 99% reduction on CSO control for post run, I think it'd be an important thing to check in on after a year of operation to see how we're doing both from a permit standpoint with DEQ and tracking this now internal outfall at the plant for compliance with RT and TP, everything that we have except bacteria with this mixed CSO flow and the challenges that we may or may not have in operating that pump station, make sure it turns on when it needs to get those 99% reduction. I think that'd be a good, good case study for DEQ to, understand as you, look at other CSO communities like Richmond and those in the state for reduction.
Really good idea. I will tell you, and most of the folks at DEQ don't know my background and my involvement with AlexRenew, but whenever your name comes up, universally, it's like, oh, they're great. They do a terrific job. So I can assure you that your reputation down there is platinum. Case in point, Justin knows, we got the Secretary of Finance and some others in the governor's office called us about a pretty catastrophic situation in Hopewell, Virginia on the James, and was asking, how can we help the city of Hopewell with this situation? And Director Roldan instantly gets on his texting and starts firing off text to people he deems as the experts, problem solvers with wastewater treatment plants. And of course, Justin was one of the first ones on the list. So he has graciously volunteered a little bit of his time to help guide the city of Hopewell and hopefully come up with some solutions for
I
it.
did something wrong. Oh my gosh.
All right, well, I'm standing between cake and for Sharam, who wonderful to see your celebration.
Okay, John, thank you for, it's just good to see you back in the environmental space in this area.
Thank you.
Good to be back. Okay. The next topic is rate structure analysis. What? Yeah. Very important topic.
You want this? You want
It's my side.
So I think we think back to July, we were talking about our rate structure. Maybe go back 2 years, why are we looking at a rate structure? The whole goal of this was to reduce some inequities that we see with the current rate structure. Where we've got our base charge set up based on meter size. So we went through the equivalent residential unit rate structure. We talked through that last meeting. And the board had asked us to go back and look at volumetric only or no base charge option to have a further discussion around that. And we appreciated the board's feedback on that. It made us go back to the drawing board and understand why we had a base rate in the first place from staff standpoint, since we inherited that way back in 2012. And somebody said it at the board meeting, I think it was Mr. Jinks, said it's a risk assessment. Looking at a volumetric only rate structure versus a rate structure with a base charge is a risk assessment. And we've been working on this presentation since the day after the last board meeting, and we waffled on the way to set up this presentation. So you can see I'm on slide 18. And this is our approach, how we typically approach the risk assessment on program policy or project at AlexRenew. We set up, Dr. Juan, you'll be familiar with this because you've done the similar things on your projects. We set up a risk assessment matrix, and we really look at two things. We look at the likelihood of the risk, and we rank that from a 1 to 5. And we've tried to identify that likelihood of 1 is less than 5%, of 4 is 50 to 75% chance of happening. And then across the bottom, on a larger project, you'll typically have 6 different categories to rank risks. One is always cost, and then you have other non-price factors that come into risk. For this analysis, we looked at cost, and that could be cost month to month, over a year, depending on the risk, or over the lifetime of a finance loan or something like that. And then we looked at reputational impact with respect to the rate structure. So when you look at those two, the likelihood and impact, you simply rank them. If you have a 1 and a 1, it's a 1. And if you're in that green color, you typically accept that risk without mitigation. So when we do a risk register, first step is write the risk, make sure it's something you can rank, and then something you can develop a mitigation action item for. Most of the risks, when you go through this analysis, I wanted to start here because we're actually going to go through a risk assessment. We wanted to explain each of the items of the risk assessment with the supporting slides up front. When we go through the risk analysis for a volumetric only rate structure, we initially thought going into it, you're going to have risks that are, deal breakers, right? We can't go down this path because this is just a deal breaker. It's going to be too much of an impact on our revenues, or we don't have enough resiliency in a COVID-like event. So we've analyzed all of that, and we set it up around the board's pricing objectives or rate setting objectives, and tried to walk through it in a meaningful way. The short of it is all of our risks are within, I would say, the yellow and the green. So they're medium, except that with implementation of a mitigation action, or low, just accept it the way it is without having to go through and do a mitigation action. I think we wrote mitigation actions in all of them, and you should all have an updated presentation in your green folder if you'll want to reference that. We did not have any risks that raised in when I say these deal breakers, where the threat is above 12 to 20. Everything is within that green and yellow area. So something that can be managed. The next step after tonight's discussion would be, it won't finish with the risk register. The next step would be we would walk through those risks again. It'd be great to do this in a board setting, but typically, with the matrix this small, it'd be about an hour discussion. We would go through and we'd say, okay, we mitigated these by incorporating these policies, or we're going to do that. And then you de-risk that specific risk ID. And the goal is to push everything down to here. So can you jump back up to the first slide? So the way we try to set tonight's presentation up, and there's a lot of graphs, and they're going to take a little bit of explanation from Ms. Vian and Ms. Lang. you go forward. One more. So the way we tried to set up tonight's presentation is we tried to walk through the board's rate setting objectives. So we look at, revenue sufficiency, stability, rate stability, and try and walk through this, and where there is a risk with a no base charge alternative or volumetric only alternative, we tried to dig into it a bit. We talked a little bit about what that would be, whether it's a COVID-like impact impacting our revenue stability, or just having a decline in billed flows impacting our revenue sufficiency. So that's what the team's going to walk through. I wanted to make sure we set the stage so we're all approaching this. This isn't an attack on a volumetric only rate structure. We step back from this one to try and be as objective as possible in looking at this with respect to risk on these objectives where applicable. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Fian. She'll kick things off.
Okay. Good evening, Chair, members of the board. I think this is just a timeline that looks at this presentation as part of a series that started, as Mr. Carl referenced, back at the board retreat in February, and we've been moving along in this analysis. And the idea right now is that there's a draft next steps of where we would go from here. But the idea is moving forward that if the board was considering a change to the rate structure, that it would be moving forward from here and looking at the proposed rate structure or communications plan, and then eventually at some point incorporating it into the budget process. So I think we hit on this slide. Mr. Carl hit on it really. It's all the board's rate setting objectives and identifying the priority of those rate setting objectives as they fall into the rate setting policy. So starting at the top, number one, legality, and working your way here, and then working your way here with the final in terms of prioritization of how the board prioritized implementation is at the. So I will kind of start with the historical look at where how we arrived at having a base charge in the first place. This slide is a slide that you have seen in different forms as we've done various presentations. It is a graph that shows from starting at 2003 and up to 2025, looking at our treated flows at the wastewater treatment plant and then our billed flows. And it's good from the standpoint of some portion of this is sort of referenced throughout the various slides of tonight. In general, there's a trend that you can see of billed flows declining over this period in some regard. I think that's well known. That's something that's seen across the industry. And then what's also helpful to know and referenced in this slide deck is that there's variability year to year. So you can see even that it goes down, it dips up, and that there's some sort of volatility in billed flows year to year. That's helpful to understand as we're looking at our rate structure.
Just one other important thing to note is this slide, I think, will be the last slide that we show the flows mix. This includes Fairfax flows as well as retail billed flows. So moving forward in the deck, you'll see a different line. It's the same color, but moving forward, we're speaking strictly only from retail billed flows, which are flows coming from our. And you will see that the Fairfax does tend to drag us a little steeper on the decline with respect to billed flows. So you'll see that Fairfax has a much more steep decline than we have as Alexandria. So we still have declining billed flows, but not nearly to the same rate that Fairfax has.
So as Mr. Carl noted, so this first graph that we're looking at is Alexandria customers and retail billed flows for Alexandria customers. So this slide looks at when we first started implementing a base charge, and that was back in 2010. And it was first in response to, over the course of 2005 to 2009, we started to see a decline on the order of an average of 1% per year of our retail billed flows. At the same time, we're starting to put in place a number of upgrades in response to the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load, are nutrient reductions associated with meeting regulations there. And so it was recommended, we looked at, we were working with Alice, but it was PRG at that time. And it was, performed a rate study, and it was recommended to implement a fixed charge to first reliably recover a portion of our expenses that were primarily focused on fixed and capital costs. And then additionally, to improve our revenue stability to address these declining bill flows. And so our first base charge was implemented. It was called the Chesapeake Bay Protection Charge, and that was because it was representing recovering costs, fixed costs associated with these regulatory upgrades. And the cost recovery was around 23%. We also had a fixed charge that was an account charge at the time that was recovering costs associated with billing charges. And so this was the founding or the start of our base charge that has progressed to today and that a part of our rate structure. Remaining fixed charges and variable costs were associated with our variable charge. The next two slides look at present information that was presented at the board retreat. So again, you look at our expenses, they're primarily 90% of them are fixed charges. You can see it's split between fixed O&M charges and capital expenses. And it really goes to maintaining our infrastructure for our plants, our pump stations, our interceptors, paying our staff to operate these systems, and doing our billing and customer service. And these costs are fixed, and we have them in place regardless of how much water any customer uses on a daily basis. So conversely, if you look at our revenues, majority of our revenues, about 75% are variable. And that's coming from the variable charges for commercial and residential customers, and about 25% of the revenues are associated with this is basically, if you look across the industry, it's a norm to have a fixed charge in place based on a 2021 water and wastewater rate survey, about 99% of wastewater utilities have some sort of fixed charge in place. And that fixed charge, if you look across the industry, represents between 20 to 50% of the total revenues that those wastewater utilities are bringing in. Looking regionally, this shows percentage cost recovery from fixed charge for peer utilities in the region, and they have a very similar cost recovery from fixed charges to AlexRenew. So I'll kind of say there's a break here that was really presenting just an understanding of the fixed charges, how we got there, and then the next number of slides between myself and Ms. Ling will look at from the standpoint of the risk assessment, starting to look at what are the risks around moving to a volumetric rate structure. And so first looking at the risk around rating agencies or our rating, we start with a slide that shows we have significant debt service already that we're paying off, and based on the upcoming projections for phase forward, we anticipate going out the public bond market in the next couple of years to get additional debt, about $225 million, and that's what's shown in yellow here. So we have to get additional debt, and we know that we'll have to be going back to the rating agencies at that time, likely S&P, to reconfirm our rating or reassess our rating. And we looked at guidance right now as to what S&P and also Moody's say about fixed charges. And if you look at S&P, they say best practice is to incorporate some sort of fixed charge. They're observing that utilities with the highest potential for credit deterioration are those with a wide or unpredictable swings in operating margins. And then Moody's gets into utilities funded to a greater extent by volumetric charge face greater risks, since volume can be economically sensitive or decline because of a shift in consumption patterns. I think we identified that there could be a risk around downgrading. I don't know that we have any certainty that there is or isn't a risk around downgrading, but it's looking at the guidance that there's some evidence that the rating agencies value a rate structure that is reliable and brings in stable revenues.
Two things to that note. We put this in here. I think if you go back a slide, we are, as Mr. Rock just presented, I think we're dependent on, it's important for the board to know that we are completely dependent on going to public bonds probably for the next several years until we either see a WQAF. The only thing we could apply for is the tertiary project. But even with WQAF, even the SRF, and SRF is underfunded, and WIFIA, right now we're out competing WIFIA by going to the public market, and we've got BABA requirements to deal with WIFIA, and that might be really challenging to write exemptions for all of our equipment that's not manufactured in the States, because it goes above and beyond American iron and steel. So I think it's just important for the board to understand that we are dependent on our rating. We are not saying that we're going to have a rating decrease because of not having a fixed charge. I think when you go through and look at the numbers, if you jump ahead, Ms. Fian, it's the revenue associated with recovering the fixed charge, as Moody's noted on the left, and I'm sorry, S&P noted on the left. And one of the things that we talked about recently with our rate consultant and staff is, have we seen our belly? Have we seen all of the word I want to use, all of the savings squeezed out of our water saving fixtures, where we're starting to come down to a point and we're starting to level off after the last 20 years? I don't think that's the fact for Fairfax, but for Alexandria, when you start looking at flows, you see a decrease, and now we're kind of like fluctuating year over year. So when you get back to the note of where it says, potential for deterioration over unpredictable swings, we're not necessarily seeing unpredictable swings in Alexandria. So I do want to make that point now as we walk through the presentation. Something to note, as you'll see, we're kind of flattening out.
Question. For the rating agencies, when they do the rating, do they consider those factors that they put there at risk if you go only volumetric or not?
No,
That's not part of the criteria?
no, they look at your revenues.
Okay.
And so if you looked at we hadn't completed the risk assessment when we sent it out last week. If you read the way the risk is written today, it's your risk, your volumetric only structure has a risk of creating revenues that are unstable. That's what they don't want to see. So that risk has been recrafted, and I don't want to get ahead of it, but I believe it's in the green.
I think that any concern the rating agencies have on whether it's wastewater treatment plants or state level government issuers, that there are issues they raise, and there are basically almost always a way you can mitigate the issues they raise. So while, yeah, you have to pay attention to the rating agencies to be scared of this, no. To do nothing about it is not right either, but this is something I think that can be addressed and mitigated. It may be that not a complete elimination of the fixed charge, but a substantial reduction and a shift over to volumetric. That may be one way of mitigating their view. The second of all is their real issue is, can you pay the bill? Can you pay the bondholders? Can you pay the bills and keep in good operation and work through a problem? And that's what operating reserves are for.
I won't steal his great idea, but we actually have added a slide here at the end after the risk matrix that Mr. Bobry will talk through to mitigate some of this concern.
This looks at the impact to AlexRenew if we were to be downgraded in any significant way, first to a AA, then to AA plus, AA and then looking at a single A. And it looks at how much additional debt we need to go out and get, and the difference from these, the various ratings of an estimated interest rate and the resulting debt service from that interest rate. These interest rates, this first one is based on the current market conditions as of July 31st of this year. And then these ranges are showing basically an average spread from AAA for each credit, and then the maximum spread from AAA to each credit over the last 25 years. And so you can see, I think, and Mr. Carl hit on it, we had previously shown the potential risk to be downgraded multiple levels in our risk assessment. I think we hold off with that because it's very unlikely to be downgraded in the first place, as you mentioned, Mr. Jinks, and then to be downgraded further would be kind of not at all likely from here. So, but for the sake of just seeing, what happens if you move here and then you keep moving down, what is really the difference in cost to us if we have to go out and get debt on the public market? And it's interesting to see that it's not maybe a major or significant impact if we were to get downgraded to a AA+, but it becomes more significant as you move down.
And the rating agencies generally, absent a completely 100% catastrophic nuclear, get your plants gone, 109. Things that is just the chances of happening are minuscule. That their action is, oh, you were AAA, now you're AA. We're going to kind of down to AA+, and I tell you the reason why, and that's your opportunity to say, okay, let's fix it. So I think going further and further than that, because of whether it's variable versus a fixed charge, if that becomes a problem, then you basically reset the policy to address the issue, and you either get back to your AAA or you stay at a AA+. So I think the chances of going any further lower than AA+ are pretty minuscule.
We updated the risk assessment to mirror that this morning. I'll pass it over to Ms. Blake.
Next couple slides, we will be focusing on the risk of revenue stability and really trying to look at historically what our revenues have been and a little bit of a scenario analysis under different rate structures in order to really understand what the risks might be during a COVID-like event. And so because that happened not so long ago, it was a really great way for us to be able to analyze this more closely. This bar graph represents different levels of fixed charge recovery. So 0% fixed charge recovery means we're at a volumetric only rate structure. And we also looked at 10%, our current rate structure, which is approximately 25%, and then a 50% fixed charge rate recovery. And as you can see, for 2019, we do have a little bit of a asterisk there, recognizing the 12 months of revenue as reflected because of the change in the fiscal year that only represents 9 months for that specific fiscal year. We are capturing the COVID flows. As you can see, the billed flows in recent history declining a bit and having a lot of a decline within COVID as well, and also obviously because of that 2019 fiscal year change. So as you can see, the bar graph with the dark blue that represents the volumetric only rate structure is lower in recovered revenues versus the higher fixed charge percentages. Revenues do increase as we are taking into consideration the implemented rate increases for AlexRenew historically, obviously due to RiverRenew capital funding.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can you explain why the total amount of costs recovered would be different? Because if you had a lower fixed charge or eliminated the fixed charge, wouldn't we have made up the difference with a higher rate on the volumetric portion? Like you would have recovered the same amount
We
of
did.
money.
We didn't do additional rate increases to recover the same amount of money as the 25%. We just left it ride for those years and just implemented the AlexRenew rate increases on that modeled run. Does that make
Okay.
sense? We didn't,
So
you
like,
would, you're
for
right.
each year, there's like 4 different amounts of costs recovered. That's not what would have happened in
So
real life, right?
What would have happened is in 2020, we would have implemented a different rate increase to recover what we needed to recover that's in the orange.
Right. Regardless of what the fixed charge percentage
Right.
was. Right.
Right, we're just showing that if we let it ride based on flows and only recovered 10% through your base charge or 0%, 10%, it just shows that we would have recovered less year over year because we weren't doing additional rate increases to make up for the loss in revenue.
Okay.
I don't know, Terry.
That's just, but that's not what would happen.
Of course not.
Right. It's because the graph gives the kind of
No.
perception that if you get rid of the fixed charge, you lose money, but
No.
that's not right. Okay. Just.
No,
wanted
it's
to
just
confirm.
showing
Okay.
that you would, based on the build flows, you recover less. Obviously, this blew Terry, Diana and Terry's, it kind of blew their mind. He goes, well, you just do a rating.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Right, but we're trying to just show what would happen just letting it ride in flows. And obviously we would plan and financially plan out years to understand what our build flows are, project them, and make any adjustments to a rate increase.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One more thing to kind of consider in this, and I thought Justin's point or this Carl's point was a good one about, doing this evaluation is one, it gives you an idea about cumulative effects and how that changes with changes in the build flow. So as the build flows kind of come back, we're going to get back to the revenue generation that we would have been at, prior to the decline, everything else being constant. And the other point to consider too, that sometimes this could be missed because we're looking at this from an annual revenues, generation standpoint, is that customers who have different usage patterns are going to get impacted kind of differently in the customer mix. So if we have higher rate increases, if you have someone that's in the community that's here year round, let's say, they would have seen higher bill impacts to them potentially versus like folks who might not be in the, utilizing every month. And I think that's a little bit of some foreshadowing around some of the data that we saw when we did this evaluation.
And we'll get to that as well, and kind of looking at what would the additional rate increases be on another slide here. So the next slide, this is very similar to the last one where we're looking at the rate increases that were implemented and looking at the different levels of cost recovery and really focusing on understanding the build flows over a longer period of time. So starting from 2006 and noticing that when we look at our actual expenses, what the flows were and what the rate increases were historically, we would have needed additional rate increases earlier within the forecast period here. So in this case, we would have needed an additional rate increase in 2010 for the volumetric only charge, and then an additional rate increase around 2015 for the 10% exchange charge.
I think that's a really good slide there too, to show where the build flows are today. If you look, we've had that drop from 2003 through 2000. Really hard to say what happened during COVID, but you see it's kind of bounced back in the last 4 years, and it's not polluted by, sorry, Sharon, the Fairfax number. But this is, I don't know if we want to talk any more about this slide, Mr. Bovary, but this was another one that, made smoke come out of the consultant's ears. But again, we just tried to look at history and what build flows were and not implement Ms. Hammer rate increases when you think you would need them, right? You would need a rate increase in 2011 for volumetric only, right? And likely some other ones. With a 50% recovery, you wouldn't have needed it if you're just looking at retail flows and your expenses, not capital investments. So this is absent capital.
when looking at really at the risks and some of the pricing objectives, shifting from revenue sufficiency and stability to customer impacts and equitable, really analyzing some of those zero bills within AlexRenew. The system and AlexRenew in general has a little bit of a higher proportion of zero bills within the customer statistics than usually we've seen. So we wanted to really understand what those effects would be for those that do not have any usage in any given month. Because under the volumetric only charge, if you don't have usage in a certain month, then you're really not contributing to the fixed costs of the operations within that time frame. And there's other those with usage that would be contributing to those costs within that time frame. So we wanted to really understand what the magnitude is. So looking at the actual customer statistics for fiscal year 2024, we saw approximately 19% of accounts had one or more bills within the year that were zero. And so that really translates to revenues that are lost because we would not be recovering their base charge of approximately $600,000.
Should we leave this chart up for a while? I look at this problem from an entirely different perspective. I like all the numbers, math major, like all the numbers, but I look at this from a social perspective, from a political perspective. Public infrastructure is a public good that benefits all of society. We get into this thinking of, well, I didn't use water, so I shouldn't have to pay for all the good things that AlexRenew does. Cleaning up the Potomac, cleaning up the watershed, doing all the great things we do. Where does that logic stop? I don't have kids in public schools. Should I pay for public schools? Where does that stop? And I think there is something to be said for AlexRenew provides a public good that is appreciated and used by every resident of the city. So there should be a charge associated with that, even if you're not using water that month. And I think people understand that. And I worry that going down this road kind of continues to chip away at the social capital, which is happening all across this country these days. And it creates this us versus them, taking it to an extreme. But I think presenting the good work of AlexRenew as something that benefits everybody, no matter how much water you use, is the right way to position on this issue, instead of a purely mathematical analysis. That'd be my point. But on the other hand, I do think moving towards a uniform cost per 1,000 gallons for all across our various ratepayers is a good goal, because that's equity, right? Or equitability, I guess we call it now.
That's our new word.
No,
I Googled that. I think it's out there.
no,
It's not?
no.
But I think you can do both things.
Going back to that wording.
I think we can do both things. I think we can have the rate stability, which we really need, and the rating agencies care about that, with some sort of fixed charge, while at the same time having an almost uniform cost per 1,000 gallons. I think there's a way to do that, because I think we're close to that already, right? In some of your proposals. Anyway, I want to make sure we don't just look at this through a mathematical lens.
Both an ERU structure and a volumetric only structure are the exact same cost per kgal. The only inequity, and there's some mitigation for this too when we get there, the only inequity in the volumetric only is the zero users. And that's why we brought this
That's
out.
important.
Because we know this because when we did the winter quarter average, we knew that we had a bunch of zero users, but I don't think we realized it was quite to the level as this was. So we quantified it. Why do we quantify it? So we could do a risk impact. And there's a mitigation. Harry doesn't like it, but you already hinted at what it is.
Can we
So
talk
the
about
next slide kind of
equitability?
puts that into perspective. from revenue and cost recovery. And really understanding that if we have about 600,000 loss in revenues due to the zero bills, and then we do collect approximately 14.7 million in base charge revenues. If we go to a volumetric only rate structure, we would need an additional 1.7% rate increase just to account for the zero bills, and then a 30% rate increase to account for both the zero bills and the base charge revenues.
Michelle, I think that's what, so you raised that last meeting, then the 30% rate increase was needed on, to pivot the money from the base rate over to, that was your, one of your points last meeting. So we just wanted to make sure we showed that here today too as well. So it's a 30% increase, perceived increase on the volumetric rate.
Yeah.
It's not an overall rate increase.
Right.
It's a 1.7% rate increase. And then a 30% increase on the volumetric when you just kind of delete the base charge. Obviously, that would get phased in over time. You do the opposite when you go from volumetric only to fixed charge.
This slide is really just focusing on if we would have implemented everything today. There's not really rate phasing analysis within this. So within the next slide, we kind of tried to highlight if we would have been a volumetric only rate structure during COVID, and then we would have gone through COVID and really looked at what our rate increases needed to be, what would that look like? And so here you can see that the actual rate increase for 2020 was 12.7%. And we're kind of showing what the revenues are, again, first on a volumetric only, on a actual received revenues, and then what the budgeted amounts were. And that's important because obviously that's what the organization, the authority, was having it within their plans for that coming year. And so when that COVID happened, when we analyze what the revenues would have been under a volumetric only charge, given the customer statistics that correlated with that, we have calculated a 2%, an additional 2% rate increase that would have been needed in order to recover the same amount of revenues. Just looking at some examples of other entities, Fairfax County is a great example of an organization that is similar to AlexRenew with similar build flow trends and just analysis that they have done in the past and their historic rate structure. Prior to 2010, Fairfax County did have a volumetric only charge. In 2008, they identified the start to raise rates by approximately 12% annually, resulting in a 75% rate increase by 2013, along with declining build flows, as you can see in the charts to the right. In 2010, they implemented an account charge to recover customer service and billing costs. And then in 2014, they began implementing a fixed charge that has grown over time. And currently they are at a fixed charge cost recovery of about 25%, similar to AlexRenew.
Chart, I know we don't have it here. Do we have the data that said what we would have gained years that we basically sold more water than we had budgeted? And that's it's the other way of looking at it is if you have volumetric, one of the issues is going to happen. And we've had more years than not, we've ended up selling more water. And by having the fixed charge, we forewent, if you will, X amount of revenue. And I don't know what those numbers look at, but they're kind of compared to the last page. They're the kind of the flip of the last page that ends up with a different result.
You can get into that, Mr. Jenks, on the last slide when Mr. Bovary talks about the, give it away. Give away your the big show at the end.
Well, I wanted to add one thing that in a way that some analysis of the slides that were presented, Nancy, some of the slides that were presented, look at the differential. I don't know if you can go back to some of the impact slides. Maybe even one more. Trying to see here it's a little bit difficult to perceive maybe, but if you notice that we've got a pretty big gap between these different options right here, like the orange versus the blue bar has a more significant gap when the flows had dropped. So you're generating more revenue under the scenarios of fixed charge. When the flows rebound, the differentials diminish. So it's not entirely cumulative, and our base period, which isn't really shown, and maybe there would have been value in me recommending to the team to include 2017 baselining to that year, because that's why because in 2017 all these bars would have been equivalent to one another, but what you don't see is the drop from the build flow line. So in a sense, we do reflect when it rebounds, but it kind of depends what you're baselining to, Mr. Jinks. So I did want to at least point out that as the flows are rising, we're seeing the differential diminish between them. So it did somewhat factor that in, although it's not explicitly called out, the differentials that exist. We were just showing it in aggregate, if that's helpful to you.
My point is that clearly this chart shows the downside
It does.
to the eliminating the base charge. However, it doesn't show the upside to showing eliminating the base charge in the years to which, and we've had more of those than not, because the conservative estimating of revenues, that we've had more revenues come in. We've had more billings. If we had been volumetric, we would have exceeded what we budgeted even more. That's just.
I think the recommendation that a mitigation, you're jumping to the answer to mitigate the risk of not having a stable revenue source with respect to build flows is, what we're going to present at the end is the idea of having a fund where those excess years would go into that fund and give you stability, and you pull that out when you need it.
No, that's the way a lot of
Terry's thunder now.
organizations fund health insurance when they self-insure. They keep a fund, and bad years they dip into it, and good years they add to it.
Understand this, or at least have it in front of them. Great. But I think slide deck maybe more than most has been slightly uncomfortable because we were presenting risks as if we wouldn't keep them in center. And that's sort of the point of the risk assessment, is it's presenting the risks over here, looking at how likely are they, what would be their impact from a cost or reputational standpoint, and then setting aside mitigations, which we've already started to hit on as we've been moving along in the slide deck. So I'm going to read through the risks, and the first 4 risks really have the same mitigations. And then, yeah, so I'll start with a volumetric only rate structure results in less stable and predictable revenue due to flow fluctuations, leading to more frequent rate adjustments to cover cost of service and meet financial policies. And so we rated the likelihood low.
Everybody should have the paper in front of them if they want to look at the risk
Okay.
matrix.
And then a cost of, we captured a rating of 2 and reputational impact of 3. And so we got to a risk rating of 2 times the highest 3 to a risk rating of 6. Next risk, I'm going to go through the 4 and then look at mitigations. Volumetric only rate structure leads to increased revenue volatility and reduced revenues during upset events. A likelihood of 3, a cost impact of 2, a reputational impact of 3, resulting in a 3 times 3 or a risk rating of 9. a volumetric.
I think one thing for the board, we went and did this in advance, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. Usually you sit here and have a lot of debate. Is the risk written correctly? I don't think it's a 3. I don't think it's a 1. I think it's a 2. And there's discussion about it and then a score. We went ahead and did that for you. So it seems like we're leading you to an answer, but that's not the intent. The intent was to not have a 4-hour-long meeting tonight and discussion around 8 o'clock. But this is something for you all to go back and think about, because we're not asking for any board action this evening either. Sorry.
The only comment I'm gonna make after the mitigation, what is the residual risk? What is the residual risk after mitigation?
Maybe finish going through. I don't think we've gotten there yet in our heads.
So the next one is around the rating and the potential downgrading, risk around a downgrade from a rating agency from a AAA to a AA. And Mr. Pearl hit on this earlier, that it's really the volumetric rate structure leads to unmitigated volatility in revenue that impacts our financial metrics and leads to a downgrade. We saw this as very low. So 1, a cost using the impact slide that we looked at earlier of a 3, reputational risk of a 3, and a green risk rating of a 3. And then the final sort of in this bucket is under the volumetric only rate structure. Customers change their water habits and it reduces their wastewater bill and causes AlexRenew to receive less than budgeted revenues annually. And so this risk we evaluated as a cost impact only, and it's a 2 times a 2, so a 4. So I think we started to talk about this. I don't think we would leave these risks. If we implemented a volumetric rate structure, we would change our financial policies to increase reserves. That would be a way to mitigate around any of these risks that have been already talked through. We'd adjust our rates to account for the need to increase reserves and any customer use trends that we see in any of these. One of the things that we identified, specifically around the financial policies and our ability to comply with our financial policies, was incorporating, instead of just a straight reserves fund, instead a rate stabilization fund. And maybe I'll flip to that slide. In this.
You want to go through it?
Yeah. Sure, you want to hit on it?
Sure. This is something entrepreneurs would be very familiar with in the flow of funds of a trust indenture. We don't have it here at AlexRenew, but it's something that could be modernized within the trust indenture if you were to issue debt again, potentially. I know that your financial advisor has perhaps suggested maybe considering it, and the idea is that you could establish what effectively amounts to a rate stabilization fund. And what this fund is it allows you to set aside perhaps revenues in the years in which you're going to exceed what your expectations are. And then those funds can be built up. Now, the connection to the trust indenture from a debt service coverage perspective, so this helps mitigate it, not just from a cash flow perspective, but also from a coverage perspective, is that if you transfer funds out of the rate stabilization in that year, it gets considered operating revenue in that year. So it allows you to kind of smooth the revenues for the years in which your revenues exceed expectations, to be able to withdraw, and it recognizes revenue in the years where you are below those expectations. So this could be a mitigating strategy employed to help address coverage concerns, as well as stability for the rates, hence the name rate stability or rate stabilization fund. And currently we have a reserve fund and we could use it in the same way, but the big difference here between these two is, I think, the benefit that you get from a debt service coverage compliance standpoint with the rate stabilization fund.
But to be clear, we would only need the rate stabilization fund if we went to a purely volumetric solution.
Correct. I mean, I think that
It strikes me as a complicated solution to a problem that's self-inflicted. I mean, why would we do that?
Just mitigating risk.
No, I know you're mitigating risk, but it's a risk that we'd be creating by going away from a structure that is serving us well and that we can, with some tweaks, achieve our equitability goal of a uniform price per 1,000 gallons. I mean, I agree this would be a mitigating solution, a mitigating, but why would we do this in the first place?
I think that, you know, as the rate consultant, I'm here to.
I know.
I think
I'm
it's,
fully aware.
I think it's primarily a policy question, really, for you all to kind of
It's a
deliberate
policy
and decide
We're
on
just
what you
giving
think
us
is
some
best.
information, Mr. Hill.
I know, I,
And to be frank, we have had discussed the idea of doing a rate stabilization fund. It did require modification of the master indenture. It's something PFM recommended to us in the past. So that's something we with either, it doesn't have to just be a volumetric structure. Rate
Right,
structure.
I mean, if the
It does mitigate
base charge were
expense
even like
fluctuations,
little
too.
lower, or like there could be other tweaks
Correct.
that might make this a good idea.
It brought out, you know, this analysis did bring that back around to discussion.
Rate stabilization fund is just a great idea, whether you have fixed or volumetric. We have it at DC Water. It just sometimes you don't want to raise rate. You have a rate stabilization fund, you tap into it and you leave the rate flat.
So down to the zero customers with zero flow, they do not contribute to AlexRenew's fixed cost recovery, resulting in a rate increase. I think we see this as its likelihood is high, its cost impact is 2, reputation is right now it's at a 10. The mitigation could be within the volumetric rate structure to include a monthly minimum charge, i.e. a 1 kgal gets charged this amount in the rate structure implementation to address this.
The way I'm reading that, Caitlin, because it's 5, if you go volumetric, that you're gonna have to do that. It's 5.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think, Dr. Juan, what we want to do is, you know, if volumetric is the policy decision of the board, what we
Yeah.
would do is we would work on all of these mitigation items and we would then go back, incorporate the mitigation actions, go back and rescore. And that's where you get into your residual risk of what's left after you implement your risk treatment and what do you have left for your risk rating. Hope, you know, the intent would be to drive it all into degree. That's the intent.
104, you don't have to rescore it. If it's 5, it has to be part of the solution.
Understood.
And then the last 2 are more around customers. The first one is customers with a seasonal use see greater variability in their bills, resulting in complaints. Maybe just from their seasonal use, they're not here during the winter, and then they see a higher use in summer. And then the conversion of volume to volumetric only is confusing to customers, resulting in customer complaints, perhaps from, again, the way we implement this rate structure. And so both of them, we would do it, conduct a robust customer education and outreach plan and develop and implement a phasing plan for these. We're already planning on that for this.
I am very open-minded, trying to be. Winter average, would there be such a thing in the volumetric?
Could be. Yes, it wouldn't change.
That would not change.
And your eligibility for winter quarter average is 1 kcal.
Yeah, as it is today. Yeah.
Can you explain consensus scoring before you go to the next slide?
We're gonna score this today?
No. Down to putting it back out.
started to hit on it, that when we come together and look at risk for the organization, workshops can be long because there's a lot of wordsmithing on this part. And then you get to a risk that everybody agrees to, and everybody has to have a discussion around each of these ratings in order to get consensus around what the ratings are. I think what you're hitting on is we were doing it in the meeting. We could have a lot of debate about whether or not should be a 2 versus a 3 versus a 1. Whether or not this truly should be a 5.
Well, it becomes a 1 after you mitigate you implement a minimum charge, you mitigate it, it goes to a 1. 0, doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Gone, you delete it.
Is that there's reasonable mitigations, so straightforward mitigations for all the risks that we have identified in tonight's stuff. And then this final slide looks at the pricing or rate setting objectives, comparing across the 10, our current rate structure, an equivalent residential unit rate structure, and the volumetric only with no fixed charge specifically. So looking at going down in revenue sufficiency, they all, oh, sorry, I skipped over legality. They all meet regulations. No difference there. Revenue sufficiency, you see same fixed charge generates stable revenues. And then with volumetric only, there's maybe some volatility during potential for volatility. With revenue stability, their fixed charge helps moderate revenue volatility, the same for ERU. And then for volumetric only, it's less stable due to flow changes. There's potential for more frequent rate adjustments. Obviously, we've talked about the mitigations. This isn't representing when you're mitigating it. With rate stability, this is looking at a customer's rate stability and not seeing drastic changes year to year. The current rate structure has a fixed charge, which helps stabilize bills, make them more predictable, similar to an ERU structure. And then volumetric only maybe is inherently less stable because of it's dependent on a customer's use. Affordability, right now, the current rate structure is easier for customers to budget when their bills are more predictable. The same with ERU. And then just, again, the slightly harder for customers to budget because volumetric is inherently has more volatility. Equitable, I think we've already established the inequities in our current rate structure. And looking at ERU, there's equal cost per kgal across all customer types. Similar to volumetric only, the only difference is the zero bill customers that do not contribute. Customer impacts, because this is our current rate structure, this is not applicable. Looking at ERU, commercial customers with a meter size that don't match their water usage will see more significant impacts. That calls back to the previous analysis that was done in July. And then same thing for volumetric only units. Yes. And then conservation, it's the current rate structure supports conservation. Similarly, ERU, and then volumetric has the highest level of promoting conservation because a single charge is tied to water use. Simplicity, we've already acknowledged that our current rate structure, the fixed charge based on meter equivalency, is difficult to explain, to understand. There's some improvement with an ERU, and then with volumetric only, this is an extremely simple concept to understand. Implementation, again, this is our current rate structure. It's not applicable. This would, from a standpoint of an ERU structure, would be a minor modification from our current rate structure, and then volumetric only would be a more major change from our current rate structure to implement.
What are the next steps? What do you want us to do?
Do you want reactions? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll need to have discussion around options. I think from our standpoint, we don't see like I said in the intro, you know, we don't see it. We're currently recovering 25% of our revenue through a fixed charge. It's not a large part of the revenue. Build flows are relatively stable. There's ways to mitigate it. You know, without going through this analysis, you know, last meeting I would have said that seems crazy to go down this path, but we're not seeing that deal breaker in a volumetric on the rate structure. So I think we have two viable rate structures that we need to discuss to move forward as a group and make a policy decision on what the board wants to do. I think so. The next step would be a policy decision around a rate structure if we do want to change and what that rate structure might look like. Do we have to make that decision tonight? No. I think everybody might want to digest the presentation and maybe, you know, we spend a lot of time going back and forth with these colors. We typically go into a meeting on that slide and have colors, they'd be blank. And we'd ask the group to kind of go through and score them. So I think that's how we score proposals, for example. You know, so we're using some of our tools internally to kind of go through this analysis. That said, we didn't want tonight's meeting to be forever, so.
But you all put a tremendous amount of work.
I'm not sure I would have turned out very different if we had the 4-hour meeting. Like, this looks right to me. Yeah. All of this is very, very helpful. Just wanted to like thank and commend all of you for doing this. Like, it was obviously a team effort. Just kind of like a sense of like kind of my initial reaction, just like, or what I'm kind of feeling right now is, you know, I'm just kind of looking at the colors. I do think the volumetric only, there's a lot of red in there, but it doesn't reflect what reality might look like because, as you said, the mitigations are included. That said, when we look at the ERU column, it performs really well on almost every single one of our objectives. And that is telling to me. I think that's kind of like what's sitting with me, like, and it would be less disruptive. Obviously, I'm not against change. I love change when it makes sense. But if you don't need to do it, you know, I know what you're thinking. You told us already. Spoiled it.
Well, no, but again, we're 5 board members. We each have a view and a vote.
I want to think about it some more. I want to marinate on it. About our equitability.
Well, if it's okay, I don't want to put board members in the spot. We're not voting tonight, but just what are you thinking? And just sort of talk in the way that Ms. Hammer did about, you know, these 3 columns. Where do you sort of feel and where do you fall?
I find myself, Ms. Hammer said it much better than I could, but the ERU gives us what we want. And it does it more simply than volumetric.
Dr. Willen. Again, you don't have to answer if you don't want.
No, I have my answer. Don't worry about it. I think you said it very well, and Ms. Hammond said it very well. It's not because you don't use water, you should not contribute to the common good. To me, you stated it very well. And the second thing also, Ms. Hammer said it very well. When you look at the ERU, it's really, you know, to me, we get what we need there without making too much, you know, disruption on what we have right now. And the other thing is the risk. You know, yes, we're talking about risk and volatility and all the things. Yes, these things may happen, but it doesn't prevent us from doing a rate stabilization fund if we want to move forward. If we have, you know, surpluses, let's put it out there. That's going to save on increasing rate, and that's just a good policy to me. That's how I see the things. But I can go back, look at it, but I think I'm 90% there.
Mr. Jenks.
I'm glad we went through the review of volumetric. I think it's not as nearly as negative as kind of this has been laid out. Like affordability here is a red in volumetric, and when in effect, I don't see it that way. It depends. You use less water. If it's more affordable, than our current or the ERU. So I think it's a closer call. And the ERU gets us into a better place, so.
I'll be
I
honest with you.
could live with an ERU. I'm not totally convinced we couldn't do volumetric and make it work.
If you go back to that last slide, I will tell you that we've changed. Slide 21, we've gone through these colors 3 different times. You ask me on my own, they're a different shade. You ask Terry, you know, they're a different shade. This is where the group landed, and that's why I say it's usually good to go through this with the group making the decision to walk through this. And really what we should have done is come in here with white boxes like we typically do, and you all go through and tell me, okay, where's the color land as a group, and then agree on it. That's typically how this is done.
Mhm.
I agree, Mr. Jenks, you know, neutral for, you know, affordability, most likely, because people know how much water they use month to month. It's pretty predictable. I think that, you know, it might be worth digesting this slide and making sure we're, you know, we record the board's thoughts on this. If can be a discussion amongst the board on these evaluations, because we can mitigate the risks. It's kind of this, then how you rank each objective that you set forth as a rate retreat, and all feel comfortable about where this lands. We don't want to be the ones dictating that to the board.
But it's a good place to start.
It is.
I think it's better than starting with blanks.
Yeah, no, this was all really, really helpful, but we did spend the last like hour and a half kind of focused on the risks and the downsides of this the volumetric approach. And it would be good for us to like, just have a reminder, like, what is the case for doing volumetric? Like what, you know, if you're going to try to argue that we should, it's kind of like high school debate team, right? It's like somebody's going to argue for ERU and somebody's going to argue for volumetric, and like, let's hear the best case. And then, because right now it's like, we've just got a lot of kind of negative, like potential outcomes that have been thrown at us, and that doesn't tell the whole picture.
That's the way I felt when I first went through this. And I let Justin know that I felt that it was like not a pros and cons.
Right, it's just all, here are all the bad things. that
Tilted
happen.
towards
Yeah.
the con side, the
Let
risks.
me ask a question to the board. At our next meeting, or maybe a meeting after that, would you all be willing to vote on which one of these you would like to pursue?
Well, what was the timeline? Like, when is,
If we do it this year, I don't remember. I'd have to look at the slide.
It's slide 2.
for November, it was, presenting a proposal, right?
Yeah.
Really, that was the timeline that we proposed when we first started these implementations back in April. I don't know, we probably consolidated a bit or slipped into January. I don't think.
Yeah, we come to the board in February, the Finance and Audit Committee in February with a draft budget. So this could probably slip a month to have further discussion around this at the next meeting, and we can go back and see, you know, what the pros are, but I think they're outlined on that slide. The pros are simplicity.
Yeah.
Really what the pros of the rate structure are, it is simple. It's equitable. If you mitigate the risk around the 0 users, put in a minimum charge of 1 kgal, it's just as equitable as an ERU. And it's simple to explain.
Yeah.
And it's simple to administer and implement.
So,
But we can kind of brainstorm on that, what the pros would be.
at our October meeting or November meeting, are you all ready to vote on which one of these to pursue?
Yes.
Yeah, your volumetric, yeah.
Now, you don't have to tell me what it is. It's a private ballot
I
at
am
this point.
ready.
And it's gonna be straight up ballot, not a ranked choice thing. I mean, I think,
I would like to know what they want to do, because they have to implement it.
We do not have a strong feeling on this one.
Really?
No.
I
We did.
Really?
I think last time.
I don't know. I've seen some
No,
like.
last time,
We did.
last time they had a strong feeling.
Yeah,
But after
we did do the
when
analysis.
they did this, when I listened to them, they really are, I think they moved to. But
The-
last time, when I was listening,
the
they had a
impacts are
very
not-
strong
Not
feeling.
what we thought they were going to be. We knew that, I don't know, 3 days after the last board meeting.
And they did a good
Looked at some
job
of these
on the
assessments.
risk side. It's really pretty good, you know.
You can't say that's the same for every utility. It's very location specific and how your customers. Hey, so yes, last meeting, we thought that the impacts would be much greater between the two.
Yeah.
And they're not. It's I think that we did a back of the envelope a couple days after the meeting, before I left for vacation. It was what, $1 million? So he's like, it's $1.1 million. I'm like, that's it? But risk assessments are negative. You have to get in that mindset and write
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah,
analysis.
sure.
And that's what we're taught to do, at least on the engineer side when we go through projects. And
Yeah.
it does. A risk meeting is not fun.
But this was fun. Okay, so how about we make that sort of an assignment for the next meeting? Everybody be ready to present your question. And based on all this great information, and if you have more questions, please go directly to the CEO and ask him, to pursue what your question is. But I think we need, as a board, to give clear direction to our authority. And I think the staff has done a great job. It's been huge to put this together.
Okay.
That sound fair?
Yes.
Remember, we have 5 votes, and we're all equal when we vote. So great staff work by all.
Thanks.
Okay, moving right along. Great work has been done on the payment assistance program policy. Oh, not today, correct?
Yeah, so we presented this in July, and Ms. Waters realized that, we weren't quite right on the definitions of revenue. So we cleaned up the definitions of revenue in the policy to have a definition of system revenue and discretionary revenue. System revenue is derived from the ownership of the system, and it is pledged in the indenture, so it's got to follow the flow fund. Right, that includes all rate revenue and also non-billed income like investment earnings. So the system revenue, that's been cleaned up. Discretionary revenue is the other definition of revenue, and that's not derived from surcharges or ownership of the system, as defined in the indenture, and that is, they are also restricted by an agreement by the payer, by the grantor, and those funds are tracked separately outside of the indenture and reported as such in our audit. And examples of that would be the billing services agreement with the city, fifth floor, so the things that we're currently using. We did some minor updates to the classification flow chart, and I will have Mr. Robertson stand up and tell you about the one minor change we made last minute because he wants to do something fancy with LEAP, and we're going to get input on it before we adopt it. So look in your green folder for the updated version. We tracked the red line of the red line from July. So page 2, item 3.
Yes.
E, and there's a reason he wants to do that. Well, don't go through that yet. Oh my God. no. Not yet. Can you just explain why we want to do the change here?
No, I don't have the policy in front of me, but I can say the reason we made, this small tweak is essentially because we're looking at ways we can encourage customers to complete payment plans. One of the options that we've had brainstormed is to provide, say, the final payment we'd set a time limit. So if it's 6-month payment plan or 12-month payment plan, say they complete 11 months, the 12-month payment plan, the 12th month would be. That would be kind of, we could do the short-term promotion to encourage people to complete payment plans, and that would kind of hopefully offset the number of customers that are falling off.
So we're having a sale on payment plans.
You'll see why.
Yeah, promotion.
So the change in the policy allows us not to change the amount without, we obviously talked to the board about this. That's why we're talking about it tonight. But it allows us not to have to go back and edit this policy again to make that, it's because it's one-time payment right now. It allows to adjust that frequency because somebody could get a leave disbursement then twice. Once for, I need help, and two for, I'm getting off my payment policy. I did my 11 months. Here's my 12th month free.
I should say we're in the ideation phase of this, but it's not ready.
Agreed. But we just don't want to have to come back again with this policy. Correct. We'd still talk to the board about getting input on this. As noted in the policy. So now we can go from there.
Any other questions on the policy?
That's me.
I really do like the way you spell out all the steps that's funded. It's very clear. Your motion to approve this policy, Ms. Hammer,
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Moving right along to the next item, which is amendment number 3 to our contract to support the biosolids diversification project.
You can file on that.
Wow.
You want to go through it?
So the board tonight is amendment number 3. This is our CMAR contract with PC Construction. They're doing biosolids diversification project. And this is specifically for improvement that or the installation of all the equipment that was purchased already under amendments 1 and 2. This is the actual construction work of getting the centrifuges installed, the new heat exchangers. The total amount that's about to be was about $47.8 million overall. This was slightly above our engineer.
Page 42.5.
42.8 or 42.5 million, about 4% higher. One of the drivers for this was the cost for digester cleaning that came in there, $1 million or so. I'm sorry, the engineer assumed about $1 million for this scope. Well, the CMAR actually obtained hard bids from a couple different contractors and ranged in the price of about $3.5 million to $5 million. That's one of the drivers for costs. One of the additional items that we found was addressing some schedule risk that we saw with new electrical transformers. So we looked at this originally and saw about almost a 48-month lead time on the original transformers. That's going to delay the installation or some of the work associated by about a year. So one of the additional items that we looked at was purchasing some temporary pre-owned transformers to help get these additional costs that we saw in the overall. About overall summary of this amendment 3 that's before the board tonight. So again, the total amount for this is about 47.8 million. The table 2 lists out the total solids project to date. We're at about 98.6 million so far.
I think with the overage, it's important to note that we were 9.5 million under coming into this amendment. And we're over by, 5 on this amendment, so we cut into some of the savings we had on the earlier amendments.
Just a question about the bottom of page 2. So this is really the cost of replacing, in large part, those centrifuges and related equipment.
Correct. That's the dewatering centrifuges, the thickening centrifuges that you saw in November on your site tour. It's the refurbishment of 3 gravity thickeners, new electrical gear, and then 4 digester heat exchangers. And that's going to allow us to decommission our pre-pasteurization system, which allows us to get to the Class B solids. That system has been extremely troublesome and burdensome to staff over the past several years.
I remember in our tour, the centrifuges looked like they were on their last legs.
Which ones? Yes. Yes, thickening and dewatering. We've had a lot of issues with those existing centrifuges as well, and having to secure parts off of eBay and other locations to try to get security band-aid together to be able to keep the system up and running.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question on the risks, not looking for little red or green dots here. But, how are we covered in regards to tariffs, changes in price of steel, things of that sort? The contractors locked in their prices, so we don't bear any of that kind of risk. Clearly, the risk of they open up a wall and find something that's not what they thought, and that may be extra money, but
So the pricing that we got from TCU is good as of about weeks ago. So all their pricing currently is built in based on current tariffs that were any laws and regulations that have been actually enacted to date. If there's future tariffs that would increase the price for whatever reason, that would have to be handled via change.
so they're locked in kind of.
Correct. And if there is a change order for a tariff, we'll pay it out of the owner contingency, which is part of that $47.8 million. But yeah, we're on the hook for tariffs. But the good thing is while we bid this, the beauty about CMAR is we didn't bid this, 3 years ago, and we're getting hit with tariffs today. They're doing real-time pricing as these tariffs change, which is a benefit of we're seeing with this, with the phasing of the work. So it's.
What about changes in market? I mean, if we're buying steel in the US, it's not subject to a tariff, but its market price may change because of tariffs. So is that something that?
Inflation is in escalation is on them.
Yeah.
Tariffs are on us. So if the price of steel changes, that's on them unless we decide to have
So they've either locked it in or they're taking the risk.
it's their risk. The inflation is their risk, tariff is our risk. The way it's set up, which is pretty standard.
So you don't have any escalation?
Escalation clause on this project, we do not. We were very kind on AlexRenew, but not on this job.
Interesting. Any other questions from the board on this? A motion to approve.
So moved.
Oh, Mr. Jenks, a second? Deal. All in favor?
Aye.
Done?
Just the monthly report, I'll be brief because Mr. Robertson has a little bit to present to the board. Just section 3, bottom of page 3, I do want to recognize and thank the board for their feedback. We have finalized an MOU with the city to leverage the legal services to be able to go after inactive balances. And we're in the process with our communications and outreach team of pursuing those inactive balances. So we have legal resources to support it through the city. Obviously, the city benefits from that as well because they'll be getting some funds back. Just a heads up, as Mr. Rack noted, 2026 legislative session for the Virginia General Assembly starts on January 14th through March 15th. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Robertson to walk through sections 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4. Plus a little bit of additional analysis that will be in your green folders. It's a double-sided
Good evening. Really quick. I'm standing between you and Kate for real. Quite literally now. And so in August, we saw the number of delinquent customers increase by 49. Then we saw a decrease of about $14,000 in the amount due to us. So while that's not a huge jump, it is different than the trend that we've seen over the last 10 months or so. So I thought it was worth spending a few minutes sort of addressing that. We know in the background that from a customer service standpoint, that there are a lot of start and stop services in the summer around people moving before school, usually in between the end of school and the beginning of the next school year. So had a feeling that was the cause of the increase of 49 customers. But to validate that, I went and looked at some of the data once we pulled the past due report and noticed that almost all of the increase came from customers that owed $100 or less. The reason I point that out is because when a customer is 60 days past due, $100 or less, typically it's an indicator that they either forgot to pay their bill or they might be a new customer and they might be figuring out what AlexRenew is, which we sometimes have trouble with. We talked about in the past. So I put together this chart when I was doing that analysis. I thought it was the opportune moment to kind of share some of this data.
The gray boxes are missing.
Oh, they didn't print.
Only on one side do we have gray. boxes.
Oh, so they are.
On the
So small on the bottom.
number of accounts, we have gray boxes, but on the dollar values,
So they're on there.
they're on there. They're just
They're
tiny.
Bottom and they're very tiny, which you kind of illustrate one of my points. So thank you for that.
Oh, I see the arrow. I'm sorry.
So typically, this is where I would say, if you take a look at your delinquency chart in the board report, and we would jump over to that, it actually mirrors that, but basically from May 24 on. So if you look at the delinquent accounts here, it essentially matches that chart, but it's broken down by 3 different categories here. So I'll kind of walk you through each category. The first one is this gray box here. The gray represents that group that I just spoke about, and that's the customers that owe $100 or less. You can see in August that there was an increase there from basically July to August that accounts for the jump. And those customers basically don't qualify for disconnection for non-payment at the moment. So until you're over $100 delinquency, we wouldn't go out and disconnect. So that's part of the reason I'm pointing. The next group is pretty self-explanatory. It's our payment plans. You can see that that's fluctuated a bit over time. We now have 331 customers on payment plans. So again, this is another group that we don't disconnect. So active payment plans are in good standing and we do not disconnect those customers. So that leaves us with the blue bar at the bottom. So in August of 25, you can see we have 221, customers that fit into this group. They owe more than $100. They are 60 days past due and they are not on a payment plan. That number has reduced significantly from when we started disconnections here. So if you look at May, you're looking at 722 and now we're down to 221. The other caveat with the 221 group is it includes things like hospitals, apartment complexes, and other groups that we would not necessarily disconnect. So including people that are in the sort of the awkward gap of 60 to 90 days, we wouldn't disconnect them till after 90 days. So all of those folks are included in the 221. So you can see how we're starting to kind of whittle down our delinquencies to the point where it is a bit more difficult to use disconnection for non-payment, especially to encourage people to pay their bill.
So is that where the new MOU with the city comes in to use the other?
Yes, that will, I mean, that's going to be super helpful, especially for commercial
Right.
customers. And I think I may have failed to point this out, but this includes residential and commercial customers. So you're looking at the whole picture, which is in the monthly delinquent chart. But, you know, when we're looking at that chart every month, I kind of have this playing out in my head, but I realize it's nice to show it visually to the board. So I'll pause there before I go. Does anybody have any questions?
Trying to get creative about what we can do to try and encourage people to pay. That he'll show the money in the next slide, but it's that yellow bar. We want to try and get after the payment plan as much as we can to try and reduce our arrearage. I think we're running out of, in short, we're running out of that big bar that we had back from COVID of people we can actually disconnect.
And so we have tools in our toolkit where we can impact some of these groups, but the 310, we can start to kind of chip away at that. We can do more proactive communications around, you know, you missed a bill payment. We've already started that after we saw this data. So we can roll out text messages and emails proactively to customers that may have missed a payment. the payment plans, they get a monthly reminder every month. So, we have communication strategies in place for that. And I think we've gone over all the disconnection communications that we're sending, which is, it's a lot. Letters, phone calls, text messages, the whole 9 yards for the 221. So we're kind of, the final way that we have to move the needle is the disconnection from non-payment. We have less people that we can even use that tool for. So I think over time, the reason I'm kind of pointing this out is I think we're going to continue to see what our new normal is, and then we're probably going to see little peaks and valleys. It's pretty normal for once you get back to your new normal.
So, Mr. Robertson, on that previous chart.
Yeah.
So that represents grand total of $800,000 in arrearage,
So this is account total right now.
but that's the value of that particular column.
Yeah.
No, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's number of accounts, not.
No, I know it's a
Account,
number,
the next one is the value.
but they represent 800.
Yeah. So there's 862 accounts. This adds up to.
Go to the next slide. Has the value on it.
There's the
Okay,
dollars,
there's the-
okay, there we go.
So we looked at the account number. You can see the value here. We have basically, if you break this down the same way we just did, you'll see we have a much smaller number than we started with here. So we have $1.2 million and basically unaccounted for, I'll say debt. They weren't on a payment plan. And it was 60-day due balances that were much higher than $100. We've whittled that down to $328,000 in that same metric. And then you can see as you go across that we've also increased the number of people on payment plans. So as it stands, about 61% of our total arrearage value is covered with payment plans. And the vast majority of the remaining amount are those folks, the 221 accounts that are past due and over 6 months.
And that bar on the right adds up to roughly $800,000.
Yeah, so this again matches what's normally in this board report. And then if you look, it's pretty hard to see here, but the increase that we saw in that 311 customers of people that owe $100 or less only equates to about $14,000 in total. So I guess the point here would be that you're seeing sort of like a 49 customer increase on our delinquency report this month, but it's only actually adding several $1,000s to the total delinquency amount. So it's just kind of worth noting as we look at the report month to month that you might see increases in customers that might not have a huge impact necessarily on our bottom line. There's a lot of variables at play. I think the good news here is that we've seen pretty steady decreases in our delinquency metrics month over month. I think we're probably getting closer to that new normal. But we're going to see, as we see move-ins and holidays, and we have sort of a varying ability to disconnect based off of Virginia American Water or weather or all these different factors. It's going to have a pretty big impact in what remains in our delinquency value. The positive too is we've collected over $1 million through our payment plans, which is pretty incredible. We've given $100,000 through LEAP, and we have far fewer, I'll say, unaccounted for long-term delinquencies than we did 2 years ago.
Now, you know these customers better than anybody because you deal with this every day. The $549,000 or $550,000 in payment plans, what's your expectation we're going to collect on that?
So right now there's about an 82% completion rate.
Oh, okay. So we might see 400 of that 500.
Yeah, I think so we allow for up to 3 payment plans in the payment policy. So that we are at times seeing people that will fall off a payment plan and get back on one. That's in part to make sure that they have access to our services. But for the most part, I mean, an 82% completion rate it's pretty pretty good. It's not bad. It's dropped from our initial, probably in part because folks that completed their payment plan then got back on a normal payment schedule. So
And
that's positive too.
The dark blue customers, we don't know.
Well, just a lot of some of these are commercial customers. So, I mean, you can see like at sometimes there's been dips here. And if you compare it to the other, it's steady on the other map. And it's because a commercial customers pay their bills $60,000 or $80,000. So there's a lot of variables at play, including how often we can disconnect. So it's more food for thought.
Great presentation, by the way.
Go ahead and cover it while I'm standing right here.
It's chocolate mousse cake.
Hurry up.
Good thing it is an ice cream cake.
So as far as the dashboard goes, not a ton new to report. We gave away or we distributed 8 disbursements this month, which is slightly down from last period. Spoiler alert for next month is we've seen a lot of leave disbursements in the last few weeks. And I hope that part of the reason is our latest sort of communications marketing strategy. So after some discussion 2 meetings ago, I went back to the drawing board, kind of used this dashboard actually and the following page to look at where there were discrepancies in disconnections versus leap disbursements. And then we picked a few targeted areas, which you can do very easily on Nextdoor, all social media apps. But it's great. It's great for specifically targeting neighborhoods. There's not a lot of social media apps that let you do that. It's something new that we've done. And what we saw was that of the few areas, including this area, a couple here, and some here in these sort of pockets we've become familiar with, 16 of the last 19 LEAP enrollments came through those areas that we targeted with LEAP. So
Nice.
I'm not going to say that all 100% of those came from our targeted ads, but hopefully that's a good sign. So we'll keep deploying that strategy, probably expand it to some of the other areas and see if we can increase.
Good use of data. Yeah.
If you go to the next slide. So not a whole lot has changed here, but this is kind of what we used is where there was, say a lot of disconnections, look for half.
Yeah.
Try to target those. And we ran those ads in English and Spanish, which may or may not have made a difference, but we'll continue to kind of expand the language piece of that as well.
Yeah.
And then here's the 8 that we distributed money to. The percentage arrearage that it covered kind of dipped here, but mostly because there's 2 very large arrearages that took advantage of the leave disbursements, and then the rest were, the other 6 of the 8 were covered entirely. So all I have.
Excited for next month.
I don't think we really have a lot to cover in the revenue dashboard. I already mentioned the replacement pumps are on site. We're on track to start operational demonstration in the next training starts in December. Operational demonstration will start in April, right before you all, right after you all take your tour. It's just a cool shot in the last page of the dashboard, standing at the bottom of the shaft, looking up. It's always really cool to see the drop pipe. It's at Pendleton Street, so you're standing at the bottom of this 120-foot deep shaft, looking up in the air. It covers off the shaft. You can see the sky and where the water flows in, flows down the drop pipe, and where you're standing, you'd be underwater in that picture. So just getting the finishing touches on Pendleton Street. I did send you all an email to let you know about some work that's happening at South Royal Street regarding the Potomac Interceptor. Nothing to get excited about. While we're there, we figured we fix the pipe. It's been identified in 2015 as an issue, and we're located not even 100 feet from it. Why not just go out and fix it while we're impacting the park. That way we're not going back in the future. So we're looking to do a change order to the contract to replace it's like 100-foot, 50-foot section of pumpkin. Disruptive because you have to run a pipeline. So we're just getting in the beginning of that. I want to make sure you all were aware why. DCTV is ongoing this week. That was going to help. Phase 4 dashboard, just a highlight there on the back of the dashboard. It almost looks like the drop shaft picture. That's building out. You're looking up where the line silos were. Kevin and team are trying to put together a plan there. Make sure that we fill those holes in the floor with concrete so we can use that space. That's all we have.
Cool.
Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Thanks, everybody. I believe there is cake in store.
Sure, over.
It's gluten-free as well.
Oh,